Of all of the advice that you just gave, is there any that you wish you would have taken yourself when starting the program in particular?
I think for myself, it was not giving myself the space to develop the language of neuropsychology. I kind of came in with some high expectations for myself, and then I would spend time trying to learn stuff and kind of get a little bit frustrated with myself if I didn't do as well as I thought I should. But it was developmentally appropriate for where I was expected to be.
What is going on, fam? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Phil Sarpon. This is Phil's Guide to PsyD. This channel is dedicated to all things psychology, wellness, and graduate school. Today we have a very special guest with us. His name is Ben Wenzel. He's actually one of my classmates. We are in the same cohort together as we've gone through our clinical psychology program. He is in his neuropsychology internship, and I wanted to bring him on to the channel and to the podcast because I think he has a lot of great insight to what it is like being a neuropsychology intern and also preparing for his neuropsychology postdoc fellowship. And so really excited to dive into that interview. A little bit about Ben. He is a licensed marriage and family therapist. He has been fully licensed since 2016. He has experience working as a therapist with a variety of age groups, 5 to 80, and modalities of individual, couples, and family therapy. After working in a rural setting and seeing the need for neuropsychological assessments, he decided to return to school to become a neuropsychologist. He is currently in his final year as a neuropsychology intern resident, and he's currently planning on becoming a board certified neuropsychologist after graduating and returning to a rural setting. As always, if you're new to the channel, please subscribe to the channel. If you're interested in clinical psychology, you can like and share this video. If you're wanting more content or content that we haven't released yet, you can always join. You can become a member by joining down below. As well, for those of you who are wanting to become clinical psychologists, I have a free ebook that you can download that just goes over the formalities and the steps of becoming a clinical psychologist, that covers all of the video content of the years that I've talked about becoming a clinical psychologist, surviving grad school, and some of the early steps of being a psychologist. And so without further ado, we will just jump right into the interview. Thank you so much for your time. I'm really excited to kind of get into this interview. Ben is a friend. He's one of my classmates. He's a cohort mate. And so we spent a lot of time surviving grad school together, venturing the ups and downs of clinical psychology. Ben is now officially in his neuropsychology internship. And so tell me about a time in your life where you realized that neuropsychology was what you specifically wanted to pursue.
Yeah. So I actually have I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I've had my license for a while. I was working in a rural setting, and I was just seeing how much need there was for assessments. People would be coming and saying, hey, we need to get some assessments, and they would have to travel 2 to 3 hours sometimes, and the wait list was anywhere from months to years. And I just kind of was looking around, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to go back to school and do this, because I've kind of always liked the idea of assessments. And then when I was trying to decide what kind of specific assessments I wanted to do, the biological aspect and the biological connection of the assessments, and like how the brain acts and where the problems are, that really got me excited. So that's kind of my background with why I chose neuropsychology. So
yeah, it's so cool, like hearing people's backgrounds, because we're all kind of coming from different perspectives. Some people come straight out of undergrad into clinical psychology school. Some people have worked for a period of time. It's cool that you were a licensed marriage and family therapist for a period of time, worked on your own, and then decided to go venture into grad school. I've always felt like people think of us as kind of crazy to either have master's degrees or be working already to decide to go back into a PhD or a PsyD. that's another 4 to 6 years. It's kind of wild.
Yeah, I got a lot of weird looks when I told people I was going back. So,
But it's so cool though that I think just to be able to look back and see all of the work that you've put in to get to the point that you're now a neuropsychology intern, and you're so close, right, to becoming an independent practitioner where you see your own patients and things like that. For you, what has been the most challenging experience during graduate school? And how did you overcome it?
the work that I was at a community mental health clinic. So, when I was doing my therapy, so it was kind of chill, laid back and stuff. And so, coming back to school, and when I started doing some of my practicums at the academic medical centers, it just was a complete shift. The demand is so high, and it's so much. The positive part about it is you get to see some really amazing different situations and different cases that you just wouldn't get to see in a private practice, outpatient, anything like that. And sometimes there was a couple times that we would have to meet with somebody, do a complete battery, and write the report within 24 hours. And it's just this very quick turnaround that's there that just, is different from being in a rural setting where the pace is just a little bit slower sometimes. So
it's so cool. I think back on my own experience of like just going through grad school, and you mentioned kind of like that fast pace of like just learning in real time, right? And I think for me, I can relate in a sense of there's so much that comes at us, especially during graduate school, to be able to have to navigate through our classes that we were taking, the externships and rotations that we had to do, the dissertation process, navigating the politics of grad school and all of the ups and downs of that. And then year after year and year going through. What do you feel like now that you are a neuropsychology intern? What do you feel like are some key differences of being an intern you also kind of maybe anticipate in looking forward to being a postdoc and pursuing your fellowship?
I mean, talking about the ups and downs and all, like everything being pulled every which way. It's this crazy, like you're trying to drink water from a fire hydrant. There's so much information when you're going through school and stuff. And then you hit this internship and it's like, okay, consolidating everything that I know now. I have a lot of these skills already present, but how do I take those skills and these ideas and take them from this kind of theoretical down to practical circumstances? As far as how it's going to change from internship to postdoc, I'm very early in my internship rotation, so I'm still just trying to get my feet under me in some ways. But I think there's also that aspect of it still feels like there's this giant safety net under me with this internship, because it's like I haven't graduated yet. This is the last hurdle to jump over before I have that degree. Once that postdoctorate happens, I expect that some of that, there'll still be a little bit of a safety net underneath there, but it'll be less of one.
Yeah, one of the things I've even noticed for myself starting my internship is that there's a feeling that like with grad school, like you're drinking from the hose. There's so much that's going on. You're learning so many things so quickly that I've come to internship, and it's almost like there is sort of like a pause. There is sort of like a relief. It doesn't feel as overwhelming, and I think a lot of it is because I've been doing this for some time now. But it's almost like it's a weird feeling of like, oh, wow, like, yeah, the learning curve isn't as steep. And yeah, I still have to learn. I still have to grow, but it's not as steep as it was years ago starting out. So that's really cool that you've had that experience. What skills or knowledge do you feel like you found to be really crucial in your current role? I know you've only started for a little bit of time now as a neuropsychology intern, but any skills or knowledge that you've been able to obtain?
Well, I think one of the things that we've kind of talked about before is neuropsychological alphabet soup. Know all those acronyms, including like AACN, NAN, INS, so all the conferences and like all those acronyms. But then you have the different, and then you have the subtests within intelligence measures and stuff. And so being able to kind of juggle all of those acronyms and knowing the alphabet soup is really important. The biggest skill that I would have for somebody who's looking into coming down this path is like you got to know the domains of functioning. What test is like checking on this thing, and how does that interact, and what happens if it's not they don't do well on the test. There might be some other factor that's kind of coming in and kind of hindering it. As you're going through that process, thinking about, okay, this test is assessing this part of the brain and this domain of functioning.
Yeah, and for anyone who's kind of listening to this, I'm sure for people who are in college or not necessarily aware of like the neuropsychology realm, this might be a little overwhelming.
Yeah.
Totally okay. Take a breath. Yeah, this stuff. One of my mentors has always mentioned to me how going through grad school, it's like the days are really long, but the years are short. Yes. And so it's really one step at a time. 2 years into your grad school program, 4 years into it, you're going to look back and you're going to realize how much you know. And so I'm so glad that you were able to share just a little bit about kind of the formalities of neuropsychology and how they associate with one another. And
if you're early on, just start with the basics. Like learn the 4 different parts of the brain anatomy. Yes. Start learning the different structures within the brain. If this is something you're wanting to do, if you learn it now, it becomes so much easier down the road than having to juggle everything that's going on with grad school, as well as trying to learn some of this stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. And for those of you who are going to take a neuroscience course or even an advanced psychology course, pay attention because all of that information is definitely going to come back. Are there any specific neuropsychological assessments or interventions that you found particularly helpful? I feel like when people hear neuropsychology, they kind of understand that it has something to do with the brain, and then they can kind of correlate it with like testing and stuff like that. But like, what are some tangible, I guess, things that you can give people to help them understand what neuropsychological assessments are?
I think one of the things that I personally am a fan of something called verbal fluency. I'm a little bit partial to it because that's what my dissertation is focused on, is looking at going back to what we just talked about, what brain region what lobe of the brain is being activated during these verbal fluency tasks, which sounds pretty basic. We should know this stuff, but there's new imaging that comes around. There's new ways to look at it. So I've been able to work with some world-class neuropsychologists. And there's one who he talks about how if he had one test to give anyone, it would be something called coding. And so it's this just mental flexibility that how kind of speed and mental flexibility, and can you kind of move things around in your head, and how do you kind of conceptualize stuff?
Do you feel like, in terms of, I guess, postdoc, one of the things that is so interesting for us is that every year there's such a big transition for us as we move along the program. And I feel like I've lost count of how many times I've updated my CV and had to like write a personal statement or like write a cover letter. And it's weird to think that, we're starting our internship, but we're also looking forward to postdoc and fellowship. How are you, I guess, thinking about that transition from becoming an intern into a postdoc for you? Are there any particular skills that you're focusing on to help you get to that point and chapter of your life where you will become a postdoc fellow?
So I want to return back to kind of the rural setting, but because of that, you also have to be kind of a jack of all trades. You have to be able to see the entire lifespan. And so a lot of my trainings have been focused on adult populations and including kind of geriatric populations. And I do have a preference for the adult populations. But if I'm going to work in a rural setting, I have to be able to work with kids as well. And so that's the thing that I want to be working on over this next year, is becoming more comfortable with working with kids. And also I want to understand the some of the developmental milestones that come along with that, because it's not just like you're a kid and you don't know how to do this, and then one day you wake up and all of a sudden you know how to do all X, Y, and Z. It's a progress, and there's these windows, and we expect certain achievements to be made at these windows. And
one of the things I just thought about is, for you, are you mostly wanting to be a neuropsychologist that does just testing? So doesn't include therapy, just testing 100% of the time? Like, what type of neuropsychologist are you, Ben?
Yeah, I got the first passion of therapy. So I think it's going to be hard for me to ever fully let go of therapy. And again, there's such a need for anything. So I could see myself down the road possibly shifting to be doing primarily testing with a little bit of therapy. That's a conversation that I had with people that I was going to practicum of. They're like, we know that therapy is helpful because it helps interviews and feedback and all that stuff. But
yeah, well, that's the great thing about the flexibility of this career, right? Is that you get to kind of choose what you want to go into. And for people who are wanting to become neuropsychologists, like that, you will have that option of whether you want to do a mixture of both therapy and testing. And I think what's cool for you is that since you'll be in those rural settings, jack of all trades, you will be able to have a very well-rounded practice in terms of giving a lot of different types of mental health services to people. So yeah, no, that's really great. I guess shifting gears now, for people who are wanting to become neuropsychologists, what advice would you give them for those who are considering a career in neuropsychology?
I think of my first thing that I would tell anyone who's just starting a graduate program: give yourself some space and some time, because everyone's learning kind of this new language, this new way of how to understand the world. But then people who are going into a neuropsychological program are adding the additional layer of having to learn neuropsychology as well as everything else. So get as many batteries. So when you do a full testing regiment with somebody, doing as many of those as possible for internship.
What would a battery? Yeah, can you go a little bit deeper for those who are unfamiliar with the term battery?
Yeah. So a battery is something that is, you are giving a variety of tests to hit all the different domains, and so they can look very, very different. But a typical neuropsychological battery you'll be measuring, getting a baseline of IQ at least, if not getting a full scale IQ. You're going to be testing memory. You're going to be testing language, visual, spatial abilities. You're going to be looking at motor skills. Plus, because we are psychologists, we're going to be looking at that socio and emotional abilities that they have. Other things are like processing speed and attention and working memory and executive functioning, and all these different very specific words that come from neuropsych that are in the world of neuropsychology that many people don't fully. We kind of know them a little bit, but maybe not to the full depths of them. So getting as much research, whatever that looks like, as possible, that looks really great when you're applying to grad schools or when you're applying to internships or postdocs. Take time to enjoy life. When you're in grad school, there is everybody and everything is trying to take your time and are demanding your time, and you're the only one who's going to be protecting your own time. And so you have to know when you have to be very rigid with those boundaries and when you can kind of let them go.
Of all of the advice that you just gave, is there any that you wish you would have taken yourself when starting the program in particular?
I think for myself, it was not giving myself the space to develop the language of neuropsychology. I kind of came in with some high expectations for myself, and then I would spend time trying to learn stuff and kind of get a little bit frustrated with myself if I didn't do as well as I thought I should. But it was developmentally appropriate for where I was expected to be. So,
for those who are just burning to get their hands on anything and everything neuropsychology, are there any books to prepare for grad school, to learn more about neuropsychology?
The number one thing that I would say for I have a little list, but the number one I would say is Navigating Neuropsychology. It's a podcast. Nav Neuro is what it'll go by sometimes. If you're wanting to just work on getting better, understanding more about the brain anatomy, the neuroscientifically challenged YouTube channel. Specifically, they have 2-minute and 10-minute neuroscience videos that go through various parts of the brain. The Little Black Book of Neuropsychology is a must-have book. I forgot it at my office. I was going to bring it. And then so there's a newer version, but a pocket handbook for assessment. So there's a newer one. And for anyone who's trying to figure out their path with the neuropsychology, the Neuropsychologist Roadmap. This is a great book. It takes you from the very first, you're like, I want to go into grad school. How do you set up your application all the way through?
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. That I think that is definitely something for me where when I was pursuing grad school, when you go online and you're searching, okay, like clinical psychology programs, navigating clinical psychology, there is so much that comes up. And I think for me, I felt very overwhelmed by either the lack of resources or the confusing sources of resources. And so I think what you have just shared makes things very clear in like the best way. And so thank you for sharing those resources. We'll make sure to link down all of the books in the description below, especially for this video. For you, what qualities do you feel like you believe are the most essential in becoming a neuropsychologist?
I think one of the first things that I would tell anybody is you have to know yourself. You have to know your strengths. You have to know your weaknesses, because this is a challenging field, and you have to be able to grow with that. And if you don't know what your strengths or weaknesses are, go ask a friend. And if that's even too scary, like, you could be like, what are some of my strengths, to see if you can get some like good positive feedback. There are so many. This is a high demand field. There are a lot of people who are wanting to get into it, and there's a limited number of opportunities currently. And so lots of really great internship placements, lots of really great trainings, but you have to have something that helps you stand out.
I love that. And I think what's cool, just to even add a little bit to that too, is that there's an aspect of, for me, what I had to learn too was learning how to take feedback. You've mentioned it too, in terms of like being able to give yourself grace, being able to recognize that you're in the right developmental stage of what you're learning and what you're going through. So there is a lot of giving yourself patience, but also through that process, every year, every practicum setting, your supervisors are giving you feedback, your professors and staff members are giving you feedback. And then, like you mentioned, you might have other opportunities for friends to also give you feedback too. And I think being able to be on the receiving end of feedback, and feedback in a way that you can kind of see all the different sides of growth areas that you can grow into. And so I know for me that was very challenging, but also I think important too, in terms of just that developmental stage of getting to where we are right now. And one of the things that is one of my favorite topics, Ben, and I think you know this, is kind of the future trends of neuropsychology. I think this is where people can really get nerdy with this, which I love doing. But for you, how do you see the field of neuropsychology maybe in the next 5 to 10 years, maybe even longer than that, in terms of how technology can impact the field, or even other different areas could impact the field?
I mean, I think the obvious one is that neuropsychology will become a protected term. And so what that means is that you have to jump through all the hoops to be able to say that you're a neuropsychologist, and not just anyone can be like, oh, I've had training with that, but you have to demonstrate that you've done that. So that means you go to school, and then you get training with it, and you do an internship with some aspect of neuropsychology, and then you do a postdoc fellowship for 2 years to become board certified. As far as, I don't know if it's in the next 5 to 10 years, but I've heard people say that probably in our career, it will change from just a term that anyone can kind of say that they're a neuropsychologist to it becomes you have to have that certification, that board certification, but to call that. The other things that kind of make me interested, kind of the question of if and how AI will get more involved with like integrating data analyzation, and how much neuropsychologists will start utilizing something like that potentially. Other thing is that like even some of it almost feels, and I could be wrong, but it almost feels like we're at the start of a neuropsychological boom, where it feels like there's a lot of people who want to do this. And part of it is I'm surrounded by people who are wanting to go into neuropsychology. So I know I have a bias with that it feels like there's more people who are becoming more familiar with it, and that we're kind of catching the start of this big boom before a lot of people are becoming neuropsychologists. The need for it is just going to start increasing. I mean, it already has increased, but it's going to go even further.
There's so many things I wanted to point out about all of the points that you just mentioned. I do 100% agree that the need for neuropsychologists is definitely going to probably continue to increase. And, it's interesting when you talked about like how neuropsychology will probably eventually be a protected term. You're absolutely right in that right now I know quite a few clinical psychologists is a protected term, where you, in order to be an independent practicing psychologist that's doing therapy with patients, you need to be licensed here in the US. And so that's very protected. But there's also a lot of clinical psychologists who do neuropsychology testing on the side, maybe do ADHD testing, maybe do some testing for dyslexia or academic testing or whatever it is. But they're technically not a neuropsychologist. They're just a psychologist that knows how to do neuropsychology. And so to your point, I think as neuropsychology continues to become more prevalent and more people go into the field, like you said, it's definitely going to be this protected term. And so for those who are in college or in high school thinking about neuropsychology, I would think about it from the perspective of going all of the way, right? And not just going and becoming a clinical psychologist, but really thinking about neuropsych postdocs and neuropsych internships, and also board certification, like you mentioned, because 10, 20 years from now, that's probably going to be the more of the norm than a clinical psychologist who does neuropsychology on the side. The other thing I wanted to share, I hope it's okay that I share this, but
yeah,
me and Ben went out to eat not too long ago. We went to Buffalo Wild Wings, and this is where I feel like AI was just going to take over the world, because I did not expect this at all. We were like at our table, we were just waiting for our food to come in, and there's these like little robotic trays that are bringing food to people's tables, and there's no waiter that's like pushing the trays. Like, these are just like self-driven trays where they know where to go, and then it has like a sound and motion sensor where it can like stop on the dot, and it can tell you that your food is here, and then you just take your food from the tray. And there may have been like one waitress that was walking around making sure that everything was going well. But in my mind, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is, of all places, B-dubs. First of all, I was like, I was not expecting that. But I was like, this is where the world is going. And it made me think of neuropsychology in the aspect of like, what type of robotic technological things could be tools for us as clinical psychologists or neuropsychologists in terms of helping our patients, And so I know kind of a silly example, but it did make me think of the way that the world is going. And
I've had
so
some people who kind of are talking about like, well, once AI gets far enough, we won't need neuropsychologists. And I think I've had some supervisors and clinicians that I've worked with who are able to look at it and go, no, neuropsychology provides a very specific aspect of integrating not only test data, but also the presenting concern, because you still have somebody sitting across in the same room with you and talking to you. And it's one thing if they say, here's all my symptoms. But, we talk about like distractibility, and there's so many reasons that somebody could be distracted. And it's not just like a check mark. If they have that, then it means that it's this diagnosis. There, you have to integrate this larger contextual information about their history, who they are, what's going on with their life. And so I don't think in our lifetime, and I could be wrong, but I don't think in our lifetime we'll have to worry about AI taking the neuropsychology jobs. So
well, at the very least, for those trays that were going around in B-dubs, if we had trays that like brought neuropsychological evaluations to us, that'd be great too.
that'd
For
be
anyone who's
fantastic.
ever, yeah, right. Like for
Yeah.
anyone who's ever like seen a neuropsychological assessment, like sometimes we have to bring in like book after book after book because we're like doing all of this testing, like the whole table is full. Maybe that robot could just bring us our materials, and that
I'm
would
all
be
for
great.
that. I'm all for that. So
Now, for you, Ben, have you seen any other emerging areas of trends in neuropsychology? Anything on social media or anything else that you're excited about?
yeah, so I think as far as like the neurocognitive effects of COVID, specifically like long COVID, is something that we don't know much about. And there's a documented effect that is associated with that. I think one, kind of going back to the AI just a little bit, touching in that same vein, is doing virtual reality with eye tracking for kids, testing specifically for ADHD. I was able to see a presentation, and they will simulate kids being in a classroom with virtual reality and eye tracking, and they're able to get even more accurate assessment than some of the stuff that we currently have. And obviously, this is just developed, like research that's developing. So we'll see how much that kind of unfolds in the future. So my dissertation is using functional near infrared spectroscopy. There we go. And so that's like using light to image the brain, and that's been something that's been used a lot in like the Asian cultures, and it's been available in America and Western cultures and societies, but we just haven't used it as much. But we're now seeing how there might be some benefits to use it for certain aspects, because it's a low cost, but a pretty good reward that you just don't get with an fMRI or something like that. Using light to see how much blood usage is being used within the brain, because there's a correlation of where more blood is being used. That means that there's more kind of brain activation in that part of the brain. So we can use the light to see how much blood is in specific parts of the brain, and we can extrapolate that part of the brain is being more active.
One of the things that was really intimidating for me when I got into grad school was the dissertation process.
Yes.
And especially when you start like reading all the titles and you start listening to everyone talk about their abstract and some of the data that they're doing in the method section, all of that stuff, you're like, oh my goodness, this sounds like way beyond what I could ever comprehend. But what you're describing, it does make a lot of sense. And for those who are maybe even a little intimidated, I think this is a great opportunity to think about some of your own personal topics of what you'd like to study, especially as you go into graduate school, maybe looking into research labs, maybe even just reading some neuropsychological papers and articles. I think a lot of the conferences and some of the places that you've mentioned, or the books that you've mentioned, have places that you can get neuropsychological resources and read some of these articles. And so are there any really good places that you feel like you've gone in terms of just diving into some of the research for neuropsychology?
It's been just more like finding that good mentor The mentor I have, I knew he did really good work. And actually, when I did my master's, I was able to do a little bit of work through somebody else with him. And so being able to have conversations with my mentor about research, and then having him point me in directions of things to be looking up. And I will say, even, I can honestly say that I didn't have an idea of what my dissertation, what I wanted it to be. But that was something that he helped me to even kind of elicit some of that stuff with it. I think it will be more beneficial if you kind of come in going, this is what I would like to do my research on, because you have the passion to keep going, because it is a long journey to get that dissertation. But it is possible. I would not recommend it, but it is possible to be like me and not know what you want to research before entering grad school.
And I would 100% agree with that, especially because you will, especially if you join a lab, you will just be immersed into all different types of research that people are doing, and you can kind of figure out what is kind of pulling at your heart from that perspective. Going through neuropsychology, going through clinical psychology program and being in your neuropsychology internship, it's evident of how neuropsychology has really had an impact on your life. Do you feel like all of the amount of time that you've invested in this, has it changed your perspective at all about just mental health in general, or about even just brain function?
Yeah. So the thing that I've really realized as I've gone through this is the more I learn about something, the more I realize I know nothing about it. There's so many things. It's very interesting. If I could talk to me when I first started this program versus me now, the number of things that I am acutely aware that I don't know has only increased. And I feel like I've been able to kind of dive deeply with this one topic and gather information about stuff. But every question, everything that I learn, I realize that there's 2 to 10 other things that I don't know. And so I think that's like the interesting thing. The more that I get to know about neuropsychology, the more I really realize that I know it, but like it feels like there's so many unanswered questions about mental health in the brain, and just even like how, and this will sound so weird because it's like, of course, like I'm going into psychology, but like how there are specific parts of the brain that like have issue or like be associated with mental health diagnoses. Some regions within the brain that are specifically related and associated with some diagnoses. Not all of them, but some of them.
Yeah, it definitely gives just more clarity about emotions. I think I can relate to. I feel like when I look at the mental health field in general, there's more perspective that I have in terms of what people go through and some of the suffering that people experience. And yeah, it definitely opens doors for just more empathy and sympathy in that way. What do you find to be the most fulfilling about this field?
Oh, I think as far as like my experience in neuropsychology, it's that sitting down in the feedback. You've done an intake session with somebody and you've spent up to 8 hours with somebody doing paper and pencil tests and like some computer tests, and they're filling out questionnaires and you're asking them questions and they're responding, and you get done with all of this. You sit down with them with the feedback after you've scored everything up, after you've analyzed it and kind of tried to integrate everything. And you sit down with them and you go, hey, this is what's going on, that people have, of that we see the things that they're experiencing, and that we can see the strengths that they have as well. It's just one of those things that I absolutely love about this. It's helping those people who have, being able to say like, I see that, and here's some steps to help you with that. At the same time, being able to go, and here's some strengths that you have, and here's how we emphasize and use those strengths to help with those areas of weaknesses that you might have.
Yeah, I mean, for me, sometimes I see the light bulb that goes on, like, oh, I get it now. Like, this is why I do this, or this is how this correlates with this or connects with this. And it's like, yeah, it's comforting to know that, like, okay, yeah, this makes so much more sense. There's so much more clarity now for what's going on. So yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing, Ben. And closing out, you have spent a lot of time, years now, giving to people as a mental health therapist, and then going to grad school and doing neuropsych testing and assessments. And it's gratifying, I'm sure, in terms of the work that you're doing. But I'd love to know, how do you give back to yourself, right? Because it's one thing to be mental health advocates to our patients and clients. It's a whole nother thing for us to be able to live that lifestyle as well, in terms of what we do for ourselves, whether physical, mental, or spiritual. And so what do you do for yourself in that way?
Doing things that are outside of this field. And what I mean by that is, like, I love listening to podcasts and YouTube related to math. And anyone who knows me knows that I'm probably more math focused than the rest of our classmates.
I was not expecting you to say that.
But like math and physics and history, and it's fun to listen to. There's some really good channels out there. So like, give it a chance. But then other things that I like to do is I love playing board games. That is something that I love board games, and it's also good for me because it forces me to engage with other people, community with other people. I need to be engaging with other people. I volunteer. I spend 2 hours twice a month volunteering. The last one, it's kind of related to the board games, but not really. Spending time with friends and family. Not all my friends play board games, so we don't always play board games. But sometimes we go to Buffalo Wild Wings and see the new AI servers. So,
oh my gosh, that's awesome. It's such a, it really is a reminder of, like, yeah, we are people outside of this. We have our own personal interest, and work can't be the thing that just takes over our whole life. There's a humanity involved in being able to spend time with either the people that we love or just doing the things that we love to do. So really appreciate you sharing that. I know we've covered a lot of ground, Ben. Is there anything else that you'd like to share about neuropsychology, or anything that we haven't covered?
I think we hit all the major high points of this. We could definitely go way deeper, went deep enough, and probably sometimes went too deep with it. So
love it. We solved it, right? We solved the whole mental health crisis. Everything is good. Yeah.
More neuropsychologists in the field, and we're good. So
I love it. Oh, well, Ben, I really appreciate your time. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you for your wisdom and guidance and advice for people who are looking forward to this field, and really appreciate your perspective, and just excited for you as you continue on into your postdoc. I'm sure we'll definitely stay in touch, and we'd love to have you back on the channel. And this has been great. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.